Welcome to the Listen Up podcast, where we explore hearing loss, communication, connections, and health.
Hi, everybody. This is Dr. Mark Sims here. I'm the host of the Listen Up podcast, where I feature top leaders in healthcare. This episode is brought to you by the Listen Up Hearing Center. I help patients to effectively treat their hearing loss so they can connect better with their families and friends and remain independent. The reason I'm so passionate about helping patients with hearing loss is because I lost my brother twice. I lost him first to hearing loss from radiation from a tumor, and then again to the tumor itself. I only care for ears. I'm the E of ENT. I performed over 10,000 ear surgeries and have cared for tens of thousands of patients with hearing loss. I'm the founder of Listen Up Hearing Centers. I've also written a book called Listen Up, A Physician's Guide to Effectively Treating Your Hearing Loss. If you want to learn more about that, go to www.listenuphearing.com. Today, I'm really excited. We have two guests. Dr. Paula Folkeard is the Research Audiologist Project Coordinator of the Translational Research Unit at the National Center of Audiology at Western University. Her areas of interest include adult amplification, audiologic equipment, assisted listening evaluations, and outcome measures. We also have Dr. Susan Scollie, who's a professor at the National Center of Audiology at University of Western Ontario, and she's also the director of the National Center for Audiology. With colleagues, she developed version 5.0, the DSL method for fitting hearing aids. Her current research focuses on signal processing and outcomes of hearing aids for infants, children, and adults. I'm talking to them today because I'm interested in their work that they've done on ear lens, and so I'm really fascinated to learn more about that. Thank you so much, both of you, for coming on to the podcast.
Thanks for having us.
Yeah, thanks, Mark.
So one of the things that's great is I love to hear how people ended up in audiology and hearing. So could you each just tell us, how you ended up in this space? I mean, as I told you, I had a brother at hearing loss. That kind of gives me my connection. Sometimes people have all sorts of stories. I just love to hear how they ended up in this great field.
Well, I started my undergraduate in linguistics and was looking for what do you do with an undergraduate in linguistics? And audiology was one of the fields. We had neighbors who had hearing loss, and I really started to enjoy the technical aspects of that, of audiology, got into the program and worked clinically for a long time, and then came to Western to do research.
That's great.
For my part, I grew up around family members that had hearing loss, and in some cases, I understand better now than I did back then, unusual forms of hearing loss. So my grandmother had a bilateral fenestration operation for otosclerosis, and essentially couldn't function without her hearing aids. If she had them off, she couldn't. She was essentially deaf without her hearing aids on. So I grew up with the idea, I guess, that hearing aids are these very helpful things, right? And when people debate that, it's like, that's not what I grew up with. They were essential to her. So for a while, I thought I wanted to do speech language pathology for kind of unrelated reasons. And one of being lucky enough, I didn't really understand what the profession of audiology was or how that was connected to my family. But I had a summer job by coincidence, essentially, one time working one at the Canadian Hearing Society, which is a wonderful organization, and then also for an audiologist one summer as an assistant, and realized that aligned a whole bunch of interests of mine in terms of science and equipment and people and hearing and sound and stuff like that, and kind of stuck with it from there.
Yeah, that's really great. And as you probably would account, those hearing aids that your grandmother had probably weren't nearly what we have available to us today, like ear lens.
Yeah, for sure. I had an opportunity to see her get into some better technology shortly after graduating, and knowing maybe what else could happen for her, and that was pretty satisfying. By today's standards, she would have been a good bone-anchored hearing aid candidate. It's too bad that wasn't in the cards for her for what was available at the time.
No, that's great. So, as I told you in the brief, I've been very involved in patients with ear lens, and it's a really interesting and novel hearing device or hearing aid that's out there. And I know you guys have done some research in that area. So that's what I wanted to talk to you about. What kind of caught my eye was your most recent research, but from talking to you, you've done research in various areas with ear lens. So we can just kind of touch on kind of the different things that you've done with it, if that makes sense.
Sure. We did sort of a family of projects off of one set of trial participants that we saw here in London. Paula, do you want to maybe sort of say how many and who they were?
Sure. So we had a group of 15 adults who were between the ages of 66 and 86.
Okay.
And we had 8 men and 7 women. And we had 28 initially, and then for various reasons, 13 removed, just candidacy. And apparently in London, we have a lot of exostosis, so they weren't able to be fit with the lens. And they were all fit with our neurotologist, Sumit Agarwal, and then saw us for the programming of the ear lens, and then the outcome measures that we did.
For people listening to the podcast, exostoses are bony growths in the ear canal that make it kind of unusually shaped. Some people in vernacular call it surfer's ear, but it's actually associated with cold water swimming. And so that's not just the ocean, but obviously lake swimming as well. And that's what I imagine being in Canada, what you're talking about is lake swimmers. And so I see a lot of patients down here in Minnesota and those areas who have exostosis as well. And that would make it very difficult for the ear lens because it has to get down to the eardrum. But I just wanted to explain that to people. Okay, and so you guys got this great cohort of really fascinating patients because you are able to collect a lot of data because you're a research institution. And so what type of question, what were the questions that you looked at?
So we wanted to look at speech and quiet. We wanted to look at speech and noise, sound quality for music, sound quality for speech. And then we also did a project looking at how the ear lens changes clinical audiometry measures, such as doing a TIMP or doing a hearing test. So we did a range of those studies.
Did you compare it to any other devices?
We were really interested in the bandwidth component of the ear lens system. And we've done other work and have been interested in audibility and bandwidth for a long time at our university and trying to really maximize and optimize what people are hearing through hearing devices. So I guess our interests intersected with ear lens interest in providing broad bandwidth that way. From a outcome measurement perspective, we did want to try to achieve some amount of blinding experimentally. And so if we would have somebody take out the ear lens, which A, they would have to have an appointment with the otologist to do, and B, they would know, right? They would know, oh, now I'm wearing this one instead of that one. And so it presents a significant challenge to how you might gather some blinded preference ratings, blinded sound quality ratings, those types of things. And when we're talking about bandwidth effects, sound quality is a really important way of measuring that because you can have ceiling performance on a speech measure and still have incremental improvement in sound quality.
So just to summarize, what you mean is the speech understanding doesn't get any better from the measurement of that test, but the performance gets better in other measures.
In other measures, such as like sound quality is very sensitive to the effects of bandwidth. So it's a really good measure to look at for this technology.
How do you measure sound quality? I don't know.
We have listeners carefully listen to calibrated sounds and make specific ratings of them. It's a subjective measure that involves rating scales.
But it's reproducible, obviously.
Yeah, good repeatability and lots of basis for it in the literature. But you do want the person to not necessarily know what condition they're listening to, right? Like this is the new fancy one. Yeah.
Right. Here's the fancy one. You're going to do better.
Yeah. This is the one you like, right? No. So it's so what we did was we had a strategy that we changed either the stimulus or reprogrammed the ear lens itself to shave off the part of audibility that is supposed to be better, right? So if it's supposed to have better low pitches or better high pitches, you can take those away. And then that's either in the computer that we're using with the stimulus or it's in the stored settings of the ear lens. Either way, the participant doesn't know which one we're playing to them. And we're just asking them to make some ratings, to do some speech tasks, to rate some loudness. And the ratings that they gave us, they did not know what condition they were in when they made them.
So you're essentially taking the ear lens and toning it down, making it more like a traditional hearing aid and testing it, having it simulate a traditional hearing aid and testing it with its full frequency band.
Yeah, exactly. So the full shot of what it can do and then some simulation conditions within it. And so what we picked about 4,500 hertz to simulate a typical decent air conduction fitting.
Right.
Yeah. So that's there's a number of bandwidths that people have used to say that's what hearing aids do. Some people say 3, some people say 4,000 to 5,000, some people say 7. It depends what technology you're looking at, but we, looking to the literature, decided that most of the literature looking at hearing aid bandwidth had compared about 4,000 to 5,000 hertz to full bandwidth.
Which, for a guy who's not an expert on hearing aids, I don't understand that. When the receivers are pretty much made by very few manufacturers, how does the performance change so much? Or is it the, the speaker, which is the receiver, can only do so much? Is that correct?
Yeah, those are some of the limitations. There's limitations for, say, feedback limitations, how much we can functionally put into an ear before the hearing aid will feedback. Hearing loss does tend to be at its most severe in the higher frequencies, as I'm sure you know. And there has been incremental improvement. The industry has responded to the literature around the benefits associated with bandwidth, and there's been a significant improvement both in the DSP side and on the receiver technology side, such that I think that's why we get these differences in the literature. It depends what generation of devices you're looking at. Actual fittings go anywhere between about 3,000 to about 8,000 hertz, maybe a little better with air conduction devices. So we were trying to have a value that's sort of an average bandwidth value.
And so just in terms of the ear lens, what is the performance range that it can go to?
So we did some measurements with hearing tests with the different shape of either that narrow bandwidth that we presented or the broadband as they were fit.
You did aided testing basically with the hearing aid in, and you tested their hearing. Okay, great. That's
right.
good.
And they were, we got right out to improvement to 10,000 hertz. The low frequencies of the ear lens are also wider too. So they report 100, I believe, to 10,000.
Is there roll off in the high tones? In other words, the amount you can get at the high tones less than what you can get in the mid tones on the ear lens?
I'm not sure.
No, the typical air conduction hearing aid has kind of roll off as it goes through the high tones. Does the ear lens have the same? I assume it rolls off somewhere. I'm just not sure exactly where.
Right. I'm not sure on that. And we didn't have a look because you can't test an ear lens the same way that you can put it in a test box and test the spec on that. So out past 8 to 10,000, yeah, I'd have to.
Yeah. The full bandwidth condition for sound quality, though, was the highest sound quality condition, and that did tap into the extended high frequency range. So there was
whatever you're delivering, you're still measuring whatever the device can do. You're measuring the sound quality improvement on that in terms of whatever it can.
Yeah. So the traditional way to test that stuff is down at threshold. You're saying what's your threshold change when you're wearing it. But we also want to look more functionally at sounds that people actually listen to, speech at speech levels, music at music levels, and loudness for a range of levels. And those measures showed us people were really hearing that extended high frequency piece. Mm-hmm. And the extended low frequency piece was actually extremely important in terms of sound quality. So it did seem to be there perceptually. So we're sort of using the participants as the hearing aid analyzer, if that makes any sense. So yeah.
And so did they report subjectively higher quality or higher satisfaction with the sound quality? I would assume they did, but is that the outcome?
Yeah. So we sort of were doing a comparison back. There was an older study in the literature from Brian Moore's lab in the UK. But it was done with people who had normal hearing, and they showed this scaffolding effect of if you have extended low frequency sound and you're listening to music, and you also have extended high frequency sound, the two come together synergistically, and your highest sound quality comes when you have an extended bandwidth in both the bass and the treble, which makes sense, right? A lot of the hearing aid literature has really been focused on extended high frequencies for the technical reasons you were talking about. We're chasing high frequencies all the time. But if you really want good sound quality for something like music, you want full bass and full treble.
Right. So you want the full spectrum. Yeah. It's interesting. I was talking to a music professor today about this, and he's like, he was talking about the cymbals and he wanted to hear the cymbals better. I said, yeah, but the bass helps you a lot too. He's like, yeah, that's true. So people almost, it's kind of when people think about the symphony, they always say, I love the violins. I think there is a certain, emotional bias to the high tones. I don't know why that is, but that's just kind of my observation talking to people. And so is there a way you measure satisfaction or sound quality improvement? So you've got these subjective reports, but does it translate into some sort of numerical scale?
So we have a look at we put the broadband and what would hope to be the best sound quality in with some ones that we know are going to be not as good, and we see if we're noticing a significant change between the different bandwidths and these ones that we know are going to be pretty poor. And definitely there was a significant improvement with the broader bandwidth.
So you're presenting sounds of different quality that you know, and seeing if they can appreciate the difference in quality being poor or better. Is that correct? Is that what you're saying?
That's correct. Yeah.
And is there a way to measure improvement, or is it just a binary they did or didn't? Like, is there a gradation?
It's actually quite scaled. So we were doing a 0 to 100% scale. And for music, well, maybe we should talk about speech first. So for speech, we're looking at an increment from a really narrow band kind of situation of sound quality that's okay, like in between 50 and 60%. But then that's popping up to above 75% sound quality when we have the full bandwidth, both the bass and the treble represented.
And so for listeners, it's kind of like vibrancy of color. It's a subjective concept. But
yeah.
It's a shift within the patient.
It's a shift within the patients, absolutely. Okay. And I remember they didn't know what they were listening to, so they're not biased. Yeah.
With word discrimination scores, people think, oh, I'm going to get 15% more hearing, but it's not that. It's a subjective assessment of the quality. Right? Yeah,
but it's still in a percentage scale. So the measurement we were doing was overall sound quality. There's methods where you can break down sound quality into fullness and nearness and farness and subcomponents of it. But in this particular project, these are older adults, and we give them an overall test to say what's 0 to 100%. What is the overall sound quality impression that you have? But then we did that across a few different passages. So male and female speech, pop and jazz music, to look at some diversity of stimuli as well.
That's great. That's really cool. So in speech, they were much happier with the broader bandwidth. Mm-hmm. And then how about in music, which
music similar. So you definitely do want that bass represented in your music, regardless of what type of hearing aid you're fitting. And when you pair that up with an extended high frequency, you've got that broad bandwidth, so it does sound very full and more natural. And that resulted in a higher overall sound quality rating for both types of music in our study.
That's great. Yeah, that's pretty amazing. So basically, the answer is, if I'm processing this correctly, is by and large, sound quality with broader spectrum is of a higher quality than without, which is intuitive, but obviously we kind of need to demonstrate that to show that there actually is a benefit to trying to pursue technology that does this.
Yeah, I think for a long time in hearing aid research, because the hearing aids wouldn't do it, it was something you couldn't test for it. You couldn't let people have time to get used to it. These were post-trial measures. Okay, so these people had some time to say, well, maybe I haven't heard that for a number of years, but I'm hearing it now, and I've had some time to adapt to that, and then I'm going to do my outcome measures. So we did not track the time course of acclimatization of that. That was not the purpose of this study, but we did give them time. And so after some time of getting used to it and a device that can do it, we're seeing this bump in this improvement.
I think it's really fascinating research. I was involved with the SoundBite, which was a bone conduction device, and there wasn't a lot. It had a high tone frequency response range than even hearing aids or other devices. But there's no literature, because nobody does research on the things you can't deliver. Like, you're not going to really do a research like, wow, high tones really matter, but I'm sorry to tell you, we can't actually deliver that to you clinically. So it's only once somebody figures out a way to deliver it clinically do we tend to research whether or not it matters, if that makes sense, right? Because you don't really want to prove it. Well, we just did a great study to show you that you're really out of luck because this matters, but we don't have any technology to give it to you. That's not what we tend to do in medicine.
Right. So some of the background literature we were looking at for this study are like cadaveric measures and stuff that say there should be more bandwidth delivered from this thing into the system. But that doesn't let you know if people hear it and appreciate it. So then we come in at that point.
Is there a measure, of audibility? Like, do they talk about that at all, or
in terms of what they're thinking they're hearing?
Yeah.
So more of their subjective impressions in the real world, I guess that's what you're asking about.
Yeah.
Paula, do you want to take that one?
Yeah. So they also did some rating scales on that to see if they were hearing better and if they were appreciating and doing better in the environments that they have worn their hearing aid in, because most of them were experienced hearing aid users, not all. So they were able to do some ratings on that.
Great. And I assume they liked it better with the ear lens?
Go ahead. I see you.
Yeah, that one we didn't do the comparative, like they didn't do a NeuroLens trial with the narrow bandwidth setting. They only wore that in the lab because, again, we were giving them a trial to get used to the broad bandwidth and then seeing if post-trial they were able to get benefit from that. So really the questionnaire that we would have given them would have just generally said, is this an acceptable hearing aid that is providing you hearing aid-like benefit in real world use? And yes, it was, and it was very much in line with past trials, but it wasn't our experimental question, I suppose.
Yeah, because it's interesting. I guess I'm just projecting my clinical experience, because when I have patients talk about their traditional air conduction hearing aid versus ear lens, they will say that the hearing experience is so much better. They can hear better. And obviously that's not as controlled as the great stuff you guys are doing, but subjectively, I get those reports all the time.
Yeah, I mean, it depends how much audibility were they getting from the air conduction hearing aid and how much increment are you giving them with the ear lens. So, anecdotally, we had some people come in with hearing aids that were fitted better, fitted poorer, whatever. And there does seem to be a bit of a difference in their reaction to the change, whether they see it as a big change for them or not, depending on what they had before.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
I mean, but it's interesting. Like, so I do have patients who, as you know, there are some patients where every little bit makes a huge difference. Mm-hmm. And so to them, even a little bit of extra data or information. So unfortunately, the device isn't always making their hearing great. It's making it less bad, if that makes sense. But they're actually incredibly satisfied if they're appropriately counseled before, because they want as much information to get to their brain and through their ear as possible. Are you guys working on other stuff or right now with that, or?
We're not working on other stuff with the ear lens at the moment, but we do continue to be interested in optimization of hearing aid outcomes through technologies that can help people in terms of anything that would help in noise, anything that would help with sound quality, anything like that. So
did you do measurements of their hearing and noise, or that wasn't part of or was that part of the scope of the work?
Yep, we measured their hearing in noise and in quiet. So we were looking at consonants like S and F, and we were looking at how they did in background noise, in babble.
And how they did?
Better. It was an improvement in the broadband settings in both consonant recognition, so understanding those S's and F's, and as well in background noise.
Is that because they can hear the whole consonant, or does it have to do with the brain's ability to filter better?
So for the consonant recognition task, the benefits were completely on the high frequency consonants. When we took away high frequencies, they couldn't hear them, and we put them back in and they could. Like, it's very clearly tied to the bandwidth of the instrument for sure, and aligns nicely with bandwidth studies in ear conduction hearing from a number of laboratories. And so that one is that's a do you have access to the cues kind of an outcome, right?
You hear it.
Yeah, you got it or you don't got it. And the sentences and noise bandwidth effect, they're in the literature, in the older literature from like Margot Skinner and stuff like that. She postulated and had some data back in the 80s that if you give an increased bandwidth of hearing, people should hear better with sentences and noise. And in this particular study, they did. They were able to bracket, like the way that sentences and noise testing is usually done is we bracket down to where you can hear 50% of them correct.
Okay.
And so then it's really asking what's the lowest, what's the most noise you can tolerate before you can't understand sentences anymore. So a good test that relates to things like having a conversation in a busy restaurant. Yeah. And they were able to do that at a noisier place. So they could tolerate more noise and still do that task when they had the full bandwidth of the ear lens than when they had less than the full bandwidth of the ear lens. So that indicates that what Margot said back in the 80s was true. Like, if we can actually deliver that bandwidth to people, it actually helps you not just hear sounds, but actually helps you hear in a noisy background and picking apart sentences from noise.
Yeah, and that's great. I'm trying to understand
exciting.
that. Like, is that you know what I mean? Like, is it because they can hear the consonants, or is it, I mean, I don't know if we do understand it. Is it a brain issue, a hearing issue? Is it, I'm not sure I totally get it, if that makes sense.
Well, I guess in a difficult task, if you're not getting full representation of what you're trying to listen to, it's going to be harder.
Right. So some of it off.
Yeah.
It's not all here, and then it's a hard environment to hear.
It is a hard environment to hear. And in a sentences and noise task, there's both the bottom up process of hearing, and there's also the top down process of you figuring out, based on the sentence structure, a subset of words that you could hear at the end of that sentence in particular, right? So you have cognitive processes on your side as well. So it's not only the bottom up audibility. So that's why we did 2 tasks. So we've got just straight out consonants, very little context to help you. Flat out, are you hearing more? Yes, you are. And then can you apply that in a sentences and noise challenging situation to actually maybe have a functional increment to your hearing that might actually help you in a real environment?
Yeah, no, that's great work. Yeah. You know as well as I do, everybody's complaint is, I can't have conversations in restaurants. I mean, that is the universal. So, and that I think is the answer, right? Like when I was talking about getting less bad, right? Because normal hearing people can't hear in some restaurants, right?
Yeah.
So the point is ear lens makes it less bad, if that makes sense.
Absolutely.
So that's great stuff. Well, I really appreciate you guys doing this work. This is really wonderful work and reaffirms my commitment to, how I think this is a great device to offer better audibility to my patients. And, really, and I think people who want that performance and musicians or people who appreciate music, I think you really have been spot on in demonstrating the benefit to them. And that's really great. And I appreciate that. So, well, this has been great conversation on both your parts. I always love to ask people, I'll start with you, Susan. What is your favorite sound?
Well, I'll give you my favorite song. It's a Canadian artist named Sarah Harmer, and the song is called Lodestar.
That's great. And Paula, how about you?
I'll give you my Canadian loon is always if you're at the cottage and you hear the loons, I am a big fan of the loon.
Oh, that's great. That's wonderful. So if anybody wanted to get a hold of you, how would they find you guys? LinkedIn? Where would it be?
Yep. We both have LinkedIn accounts, as does the National Center for Audiology. So the National Center for Audiology is on Twitter and LinkedIn. So they can contact us through that means.
Well, this has been great, guys. Thank you so much. For everybody listening, we have Dr. Paula Folkeard and Dr. Susan Scollie. They both work at the National Center for Audiology at Western University. I really appreciate you coming on, sharing your expertise and research, and I look forward to what else comes out of your lab, because this is really great stuff and really important to, translating to patient care on my side. Not that you're not doing it too, but, really this is the stuff that gets people to understand, like, we are doing stuff to move this field forward. And I really appreciate your efforts in that respect.
Thank you.
Thanks for having us today, Mark. We appreciate the opportunity.
Great, guys. Thank you so much. Have a great day.
Thanks for tuning in to the Listen Up podcast. We'll see you again next time, and be sure to click subscribe to get updates on future episodes.